between the lines. Got to read. Got to read between.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom DeAnver. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, I was contemplating when we were putting some material together for this program this week, I was really contemplating about getting into the Kavanaugh fiasco, and I decided against it. And I'll tell you why. Because this is just another episode of, and I don't get into the divide paradigm left and right. Because if you look at what's going on here, this is nothing that's going to benefit our country or our people. This is pure politics at its best, in the sense of seeing to the American people and presenting to the American people exactly what the interests are of the extreme left. Now, you've got Dianne Feinstein here, who had this supposed information and then decided for 20 days, and then decided not to present the information during the hearings, but use the press to leak the supposed information. So the press, which is all in cahoots, academia, all of it is in cahoots against the Trump administration, because the Trump administration, whether you like him or not, you like his policies or not, he is a nationalist. He is, look what he's done. He hasn't implemented any of his policies yet, my friends. All he has done is taken the hangman's noose that has been on the economy of our country, that was put in place by the international bankers, the globalists. That's all he's done, and he hasn't even done all of that yet. He obviously does not have control of his Justice Department. It's not his Justice Department. It's not our government. It is the bankers' government, and you're seeing this with the Kavanaugh nomination for Supreme Court Justice. So Dianne Feinstein, who, by the way, is a Chinese agent. I said that. Yes, I did. Dianne Feinstein is a Chinese agent. Hillary Clinton is a Chinese agent. An agent, my friends, represents an entity, okay? And what they have done, I mean, we know of 21 spies that were either tortured in or killed in China because of the release of Hillary Clinton using an open server. That's not makeup, folks. That's reality. Dianne Feinstein has her assistant chief of staff. She came out and said he was nothing more than a chauffeur, more lies, is a Chinese agent for the PLA, People's Liberation Army. But yet this woman, who has made millions of dollars under the table deals as a congresswoman, has literally said and tried to stop this process of Kavanaugh being nominated by withholding this information, using the press, the media, as a release forum so they can entwine the American people in it, and then delay his nomination, the whole process. So why is she not being charged with obstruction of justice? Withholding information. Why is she not being lying? Why is she not being charged? Because she is part of the Just Us system, and we are not. And I'm going to stop there on it, because I could go on for hours about what we're seeing here. But what this also does, my friends, is they control what people are speaking of. They control the demographics of what the media is presenting. They got 65 women who have said that, no, this didn't happen. The one person that this woman has said was in the room and witnessed it says it never happened. Doesn't matter. You got 65 women that said he's a perfect gentleman. You got former girlfriends. No one can place the judge there at this party. She won't give the physical address, on and on and on and on and on. And then we find out about her history. She is a leftist wacko. Yeah, oh yeah, she's a professor. Of course she's a professor. Of course she's in academia. She's a leftist wacko. Another question is, Why did she expunge all of her social media before going forward with this? Again, I could go on about this, folks, for an hour, but I'm going to stop right here because the subject matter that we are going to be continuing to speak of is fear. The use of fear to make people on the masses react the way they want you to react. Now, you have to remember the quote from Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell is the founder of the American education system, him and John Dewey, okay? They were complete secular people. They did not believe in any teaching of morality. They did not believe in the Bible. They did not believe in morality at all. Now, I read an interesting quote, and it went like this, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it basically said that if a society makes a person intelligent and then does not teach that very same individual morality, then society has created a menace to itself. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you teach someone how to make, say, a nuclear bomb, and that person does not have the foundation of morality where that nuclear bomb should only be used in the most worst case scenario where there is no other option because of the devastation that it will create, and not used as a weapon of influence, that's where the borderline of foundation of morality comes in. Now, last week I got into, and I want to continue with this, some of the false flags that governments have been used. And I told you I had another 14 pages here, and I'm only going to do like maybe another 7 minutes of this. But I want you to understand, my friends, that every time there is an event, as FDR said, if there is a political event, you can bet it was meant to happen that way. Because nothing, my friends, happens by super chance. And I'm talking happen chance, excuse me. I'm talking 9/11. I'm talking everything from 9/11 down to the smallest thing you can think of. And you have got to ask yourself every time, qui bono? Who is benefiting from this event? Who had the motivation to bring this forward? So really quick, let's just continue with this. And then we're going to get into some other things about the use of fear. Okay, this is number 31. A Rwandan government inquiry admitted that in 1994, shoot down and murder of the Rwandan president, who was from a Hutu tribe, a murder blamed on the Hutus and of the rival Tutsi tribe, which led to the massacre of over 800,000 Tutsis by the Hutus, was committed by Hutu soldiers and falsely blamed on the Tutsis. I remember this going on, folks. So do you understand what they're saying here? They shot down their own president's plane. It's his military. Wasn't his military, was it? Just what's going on today. But the military of Rwanda shot down the president's plane to blame it on a rival tribe. Think of that. Something like blowing up buildings to blame it on a rival religion. Here we go. This is 32. Saudi government blamed Iran in 1996 bombing of the Khobar Towers housing complex for American military personnel in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Interior Minister subsequently admitted the attack was executed by Saudi hands. This is a quote. The attack was executed by Saudi hands. No foreign party had any role in it. Now, I forget the number, and I apologize for that, but it was over 100, I believe it was just over 100 U.S. Soldiers were murdered in that attack. Very interestingly enough, if you look at the construction company that rebuilt them towers, the construction company was owned by Sim bin Laden and the Bush family. Look it up. We read that to you when that event went on. Let us continue. An Indonesian government fact-finding team investigated violent riots which occurred in 1998 and determined that elements of the military had been involved in the riots, some of which were deliberately provoked. Of course, Because what happens if you have riots in the street? Now you got to have, the militarized police, and the people will allow this for what? Because their perceived safety. Number 34, senior Russian senior military and intelligence officers admit that the KGB blew up the Russian apartment buildings in 1999 and falsely blamed it on the Chechens in order to justify an invasion of Chechnya. And it was successful. Number 35, CIA agents and documents admit that the agency gave Iran plans for building nuclear weapons so the U.S. could frame Iran for trying to build the bomb. Of course, what they were trying to do, my friends, and then, of course, we got Iraq to go to war with Iran, so we didn't have to push that no more. Number 36, as reported by the New York Times, BBC, and Associated Press, the Macedonian officials admit that in 2001, the government murdered 7 innocent immigrants in cold blood and pretended that they were al-Qaeda soldiers attempting to assassinate Macedonian police in order to join the war on terror. They lured foreign migrants into the country, executed them in a staged gun battle, and then claimed they were a unit backed by al-Qaeda intent on attacking Western embassies. Specifically, Macedonian authorities had lured the immigrants into the country and then, after killing them, posed the victims with planted evidence, bags of uniforms and semi-automatic weapons at their side. Now, my friends, I will tell you right now, actually, for sake of time, I'm not going to get into it. Let's continue. Number 37, as the July 2001 G8 summit in Genoa, Italy, black-cladded thugs were videotaped getting out of police cars and were seen by an Italian MP carrying iron bars inside the police station. Subsequently, senior police officials in Genoa admitted that the police planted 2 Molotov cocktails and faked the stabbing of a police officer at the G8 summit in order to justify a violent crackdown against the protesters. My friends, I am certain that was all put in place by who? The elite that were at the G8 summit because they didn't want the protesters. Let us continue. Number 38, the U.S. falsely blamed Iraq for playing a role in the 9/11 attacks, as shown by a memo from the Defense Secretary, as one of the main justifications for launching the Iraq War. And that's still going on, isn't it? Okay. The U.S. government was so desperate to pin 9/11 on Iraq that it implemented a special type of torture on the Gitmo suspects. The chief lawyer for the Gitmo litigation, Vijay Panadahanan, and I apologize if I'm butchering that, said the torture of the 9/11 suspects was widespread. The entire torture program, the torture program, so that means it came from the top, folks, was geared towards obtaining false confessions linking Iraq and 9/11. Senator Levin revealed that the U.S. used communist torture techniques specifically aimed at creating false confessions. Much of the 9/11 Commission report was based upon the testimony of these very same people who were tortured. At least 4 of the people whose interrogations figured in the 9/11 Commission report have claimed that they told the interrogators information as a way to stop being tortured. One of the commission's main sources of information was tortured until he agreed to sign a confession that he was not even allowed to read. The 9/11 Commission itself doubted the accuracy of the torture confessions and yet kept their doubts to themselves. Of course they did. 5 or 6 of them have come out and said the whole thing was a facade. Okay, let us continue. The 9/11 Commission itself doubted the accuracy of the torture confessions, yet kept the doubts to themselves. Ron Sutskin, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, also reported that the White House ordered the CIA, listen to this, to forge and backdate a document falsely linking Iraq with Muslim terrorists and 9/11, and that the CIA complied with those instructions and in fact created the forgery, which was then used to justify the war against Iraq. Still going on, isn't it? Okay. Even after the 9/11 Commission admitted that there was no connection between Iraq and 9/11, Dick Cheney said that the evidence was overwhelming that al-Qaeda had a relationship with Saddam Hussein's regime and that Cheney probably had information unavailable to the commission, that the media was not doing their homework in reporting such ties. Top U.S. officials now admit the Iraq war was really launched for oil and not 9/11 or weapons of mass destruction. The 9/11 Commission and co-chair of Congressional Inquiry and 9/11 both say in sworn declarations that the Saudi government is linked to the 9/11 attacks. Top American intelligence officials admit that the CIA and Saudi Arabia conspired to keep the real details of the 9/11 attack secret. Let me read that again to you. Top American intelligence officials admit that the CIA and Saudi Arabia conspired to keep the real details of the 9/11 attack secret. Indeed, the U.S. went to extreme measures to destroy evidence regarding what really happened at 9/11. Folks, I'm going to stop here on that because I could go on, not for an hour, not for 5 hours, but for weeks about the information and evidence and policies in a crime scene that were not followed on 9/11. Let us continue. Okay, folks, I'm going to skip by the 9/11 stuff. Although the FBI now admits that 2001 anthrax attacks were carried out by one or more of U.S. government scientists, a senior FBI official says the FBI was actually told to blame the anthrax attacks on al-Qaeda by White House officials. Government officials also confirmed the White House tried to link the anthrax to Iraq as a justification for regime change in that country. Number 40, according to the Washington Post, Indonesian police admit that the Indonesian military killed American teachers in Papua and in 2002 and blamed the murders on the Papuan separatist group in order to get that group listed as a terrorist organization. Our military then got involved with that, special forces. The U.S. The well-respected former Indonesian president also admits that the government had a role in the Bali bombings. Number 42, police outside a 2003 European Union summit in Greece were filmed planting Molotov cocktails on a peaceful protester. In 2003, the U.S. Secretary of Defense admitted that interrogators were authorized to use the following methods: false flags, convincing the detainee that the individual is from a country other than the United States are interrogating him. While not a traditional false flag attack, this deception could lead to former detainees, many of all who were tortured, attacking the country falsely blamed for the interrogation and torture. Number 44, former defense justice lawyer John Woo, in a 2005 statement, said that the U.S. should go on the offensive against al-Qaeda, having our intelligence agencies, listen to this, create a false terrorist organization. It could have its own websites, recruitment centers, training camps, and fundraising operations. It would launch fake terrorist operations and claim credit for real terrorist strikes, helping to sow confusion within the al-Qaeda ranks and American public, causing operatives to doubt other identities and to question the validity of communications. Folks, formed al-Qaeda. We already know this. We've gone over this. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn in charge of the DIA. Right? I have to stop here for the sake of time. I'm sorry on that part. On the DIA, right? Who formed it? Who funded it, trained it, and supplemented it? Who? Come on, say it. The Obama administration. The U.S. government funded, founded, and trained and supplied logistics to al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call it this week. Now, we also know this from General Jones saying we will not be al-Qaeda's air force, on and on and on. We could go on about that, but we're not going to. We're going to keep talking about the use of fear, which is what all these attacks were about, my friends. Create fear. Fear is the biggest motivating emotion that you can get and use and manifest and put into play to get a person or a people to react the way you want them. Now, I know for those of you that watch this program, we have always discussed with you, besides the key bono, who benefits from any event, you have got to ask yourself this Hegelian dialectic equation. George Hegel, a brilliant German philosopher, who, by the way, taught Karl Marx many of his things. But what happens is, picture a triangle. 3 points of this triangle, okay? I'm going to be quick here. You have to create the crisis. to get the emotional response you want from the people. And as Hegel says, fear is the most important emotion that you want to get from this crisis. And if you can mix in a little bit of anger in that recipe, even the better. But create the crisis, get the emotional response you want from the people, fear being the most important. And then the last part of this triangle is to bring in the solution that you want to mandate and implement the whole time, which is allowed by the people, actually desired by the people because of the state of fear, because of the use of the crisis that they created. Crisis, reaction, solution. Understand that. You have got to understand that, my friends. Now, let's get back into some famous quotes from people that we all know that we've used before. This is from George Collins. Here's a bumper sticker I'd like to see. We are the proud parents of a child who has resisted his teacher's attempts to break his spirit and bend him to the will of his corporate masters. Think of them words, folks. And here's Adolf Hitler. Make the lie big. Make it simple. Keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. Happens every day. I see this put into play every single day. Another one, George Goebbels. This is the propaganda minister of Adolf Hitler, of the Nazi regime. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will. You see, folks, it's not by the barrel of the gun so much anymore. Yeah, in the back of our minds, we all know the government has got, this massive militarized police state, and the police is indoctrinated with us against them mentality as the public. You got to understand that. But what works best with this, what Goebbels is saying here, is that you want the people to, number one, not understand that this is lies and falsehoods. You don't want the people to understand that they are the target of the propaganda. You don't want the people to understand that they are being manipulated. You want the people to believe that they are making their own free will choice to go forward with the desired end results by the manipulators. This is what he's speaking of. Let us continue. Okay, where does the press come in with this? The media. Okay, this is John Swinton. We've been into this before. The business of the journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. And this is why they are afraid of the alternative media, my friends, because the alternative media is getting much better ratings than CNN. As we read to you one time, reruns of Yogi Bear, which is a cartoon from my day as a child, has higher ratings than some of the news broadcasts and programs at CNN. Let us continue. And I take that as a great sign. This is from Samuel Clemens. You know him as Mark Twain. It is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. Absolutely correct. And why? Because of ego gets involved here and pride gets involved here. Let us continue. Now, this is from Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell is the father, him and John Dewey, of the American education system. And what we are seeing, the deliberate dumbing down of the American student, as we read about in our technical research operators manual. They wanted to take the reading down to a 6th grade level. Well, they've done very well because a high school graduate today, as compared to 1964 when the feds took over the education in this country, is actually at a 4th grade reading level. So they have actually brought it down to a lower level than even what they were desiring, what their set goal was. Now, what does the founder of American education have to say about education? He says, men are born ignorant, not stupid. They are made stupid by education. Let that settle in for a little bit. Do you remember the quote we had from Bertrand Russell from his book? That the student, and I'm paraphrasing, the student, once the student goes through the school system, should not be able to reason and think on his own. The student should only act as the schoolmaster had desired. Can you say snowflakes? Can you say cry-ins? You see it? And look at the expense that we pay for this deliberate dumbing down indoctrination system. And what is the goal of this system, my friends? Men are born ignorant. Ignorant means to be without knowledge, not stupid. They are made stupid by education. You get it? Do you remember in our research operators manual, we were talking about how they read verbatim how they would not teach real mathematics, real science, real law, real history. Them were the four big topics. Do you remember that? They were not going to teach reality, my friends. They are going to teach a devised, hopeful utopia. As long as we let the government and the bankers handle everything. But don't you ask questions. Don't you look for the science, the real math, the real history, the real law. Let's get into some more quotes here. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be real quick. This is from Philip G. Zimbardo. The most dramatic instances of direct behavioral change and mind control are not the consequence of exotic forms of influence, such as hypnosis, psychotropic drugs, or even brainwashing. But rather, now listen to this, the systematic manipulation of the most mundane aspects of human nature over time in confined settings. Very important. There's other quotes here, but I am not going to, for the sake of time, I have to go on. This is Mr. Huxley again. One believes things because one has been conditioned to believe them. Our government would never do this to us. Our government wouldn't put toxins in our water. They do. Our government wouldn't spray us with chemtrails. They do. The Federal Reserve is part of the government. It even says the word federal. They're not. I could go on all day on that one, folks. We have been conditioned to believe the lies that we take to heart. Let us continue. Edward Bernays. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. This is why they keep pushing folks, we're a democracy, we're a democracy. We're not a democracy. We are a republic. Here's something you don't understand about law. We're a republic. Everybody from stem to stern, top to bottom, is supposed to be equal under that law. Do you see? But in a democratic society, we are what? We are conditioned and manipulated to believe that a government is a benevolent organization looking out for our well-being. It should be obvious to anyone who sees what's going on that it is not. The government has been weaponized against us, my friends. Every aspect of the government is a weapon used against us when it is in the hands of evil. Let us continue. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitutes an invincible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Now, he's right on the money here. And think about this. The average American doesn't believe there is an invincible government, even though this is all being exposed on a daily basis. But who are we governed by? An unseen mechanism of society, which constitutes an invincible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And who controls this power, my friends, is the international bankers. Let us continue with Mr. Bernays. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or in our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. And what did Mr. Goebbels say? Propaganda works best when what? You think you're acting on your own free will. But you're not, are you? Because in almost every act of your daily lives, whether it's in the sphere of politics or business, whether it's in your social conduct or your ethical thinking, you are dominated by a relatively small number of persons who understand the mental process and social patterns of us. It is they who pull the wires which control the public minds. Let us continue. Almost all people are hypnotics. The proper authorities saw to it that the proper belief should be induced and the people believe properly. That is Charles Fort. He wrote a great book on the use of deception. See? So almost all people are hypnotics. When you turn on your TV, my friends, you go into a stage A hypnotic state. The proper authority, that's the bankers, saw to it that the proper belief, what they want you to believe, should be induced. And that the people believe properly. That you will believe properly. You will believe what they have induced into your mind. Let us continue. This is Mr. Huxley. This concern with basic condition of freedom, the absence of physical constraint, is unquestionably necessary, but it is not all that is necessary. It is perfectly possible for man to be out of prison and yet not be free. To understand no physical constraint and yet to be psychologically captive. Compelled to think, feel, and act as the representatives of the national state or some private interest within the nation would want him to think, feel, and act. You get that? Isn't that something? Folks, this has been going on and on and on and on. And this is what makes programs like this and the hundreds of other ones around this country such a thorn in the side. This is why I have been, it's why I've had the Secret Service show up at my door, do a 2.5-day, 13-person interview about me. This is why I'm on 2 FBI watch lists. I'm not a threat to anybody with physical violence, my friends. The threat is that you are getting information they don't want you to have. Maybe you're starting to take this information and put it together and see that you have been manipulated. You have been lied to. That's what the danger is. And that's why they are after the alternative media the way they are. Because they have the algorithms, folks. They know CNN's a non-factor anymore. They understand that. They understand that CNN and MSNBC would not be on the air today if they did not get funding from the top funds, and we read that to you verbatim when it happened. Like I said, there are news programs on CNN that have lower ratings than reruns of Yogi Bear, the cartoon. And we read that to you verbatim. So, they yet be a psychological captive, compelled to think, feel, and act as a representative of the national state or of some private interest within the nation, want him to think, feel, and act. Why do you think he added in his book, Brave New World, or some private interest within the nation? You know who that is? That's the international bankers. That's the Federal Reserve Bank. Private for-profit bank that you're a co-surety to the facade debt. Why are we not taught in school that the Federal Reserve is a private for-profit banking organization? That we don't have dollars anymore? That a birth certificate is a bond? That we don't own any property at all? Because they control education. And education is what? They are made stupid by education. According to Bertrand Russell, the founder of current education system in this country. Very expensive program, I will add. Let us continue. This is Ruhandi Roy. It is a supreme folly to believe that nuclear weapons are deadly only if they are used. The fact is that the fact that they exist at all, their presence in our lives will wreak more havoc than when we begin to fathom. Nuclear weapons pervade our thinking, control our behavior, administer our societies, inform our dreams. They bury themselves like meat hooks deep into the base of our brains. They are purveyors of madness. They are the ultimate colonizer. Whiter than any white man that ever lived, the very heart of whiteness. What is she saying? She's saying that just the threat of nuclear weapons does what? Alters our lifestyle. Because we've got this big threat, this big communist threat, which, by the way, we financed. We fought World War II to free 2/3 of the world from the Axis powers, and then gave 2/3 of the world that we freed to the communists that murdered hundreds of millions of people that we financed because we needed what? The Cold War. You have to have an enemy. The Berlin Wall come down in 1989. By 1991, we already had a new enemy, didn't we? Saddam Hussein. Who we put in power in 1958. You see? Fear. Fear is what she's talking about. Fear is the ultimate motivator, my friends. Fear. Our minds have been poisoned, and our accepted beliefs are artificial. Bryant McGill. Our minds have been poisoned, and our beliefs are artificial. I totally agree. Fear, my friends, is the big motivator. What about some other aspects of fear? Because when you look at the DHS definition of terrorism, and I'm paraphrasing it, it is manifesting or creating the use of fear to manipulate a people. So terrorism, their number one goal is to create a crisis, to spread fear amongst the people. Because, again, fear is the bigger motivator. Crisis, reaction, solution. Got to have fear in that equation, right? Well, what about our government? We don't have our government. It's their government. Understand that, folks. We do not have a government. Our government was usurped on March 9th, 1933. We lost most of our government in 1865 to 1871 with things like the Lieber Codes, the second U.S. Constitution that was written. And I know some of you, if you're not watching this program, you're saying, boy, this guy's really out of his mind. Yes, folks, I don't have time to get into it, but look up the 2 U.S. constitutions. We did 2 programs on this. We broke down the language. The second constitution has things like it in the 14th Amendment where it federalized everybody, where they took the black people off the private plantation and put everybody on the federal plantation. But it also has language like the debt will not be questioned. Does that sound like a document of freedom? The debt will not be questioned? No. I don't have time to get into all that. The use of fear is the biggest motivator. It's every single day. Hamas, created by Mossad. Al-Qaeda, created by the CIA and the State Department under Hillary Clinton. Okay? And what that does, folks, is they know they're going to have people who are going to battle against them. So not only do you find out who your enemy is, but you actually control them, and they are being manipulated, and they think they're working under their own free will. You get it? The asymmetrical warfare. Now, we're going to be showing you a clip about the use of fear. And it's a short clip, but we found it very interesting and thought maybe they could break it down better than I'm able to articulate to you. So, Bill, if we could, let us please roll that clip, and we'll see you on the return.
Fear is one of the most powerful human emotions. While highly useful in situations where threat of immediate harm exists, it is the most debilitating and dangerous of emotions when present unnecessarily. In this video, we will examine how fear can be used as a tool to manipulate others, and how those in positions of power, past and present, have effectively used fear to control certain aspects of society. Humans, especially since the Industrial Revolution, have become increasingly protected from the dangers that our ancestors faced in relation to the natural world. But as mankind's fear of nature and the elements has fallen, in its place many other fears have come to fill the void. Some of these fears have arisen in response to real threats, but many have been in response to things imagined, as the Stoic philosopher Seneca pointed out. There are more things likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. While some of these imagined fears are of one's own making, many are the consequence of narratives created by those in positions of power. Individuals looking to take advantage of and manipulate others have long realized the power of fear. When one is gripped by fear of a threat, real or imagined, their rational and higher cognitive capacities shut down, making them easily manipulated by anyone that promises safety from the threat. No passion so effectually robs the mind of all its powers of acting and reasoning as fear, wrote the 18th century philosopher Edmund Burke. Ruling classes for thousands of years have understood the power of intentionally invoking fear in their subjects as a means of social control. Henry Frankfort, in his book The Intellectual Adventures of Ancient Man, noted that between 1800 and 1600 BC, a fear psychosis spread through ancient Egypt, precipitated by the invasion of foreign rebels hungry for power and conquest. Initially, this fear psychosis was justified by a real threat. Yet even when these foreigners were successfully driven far away from Egypt, the ruling powers sought to artificially maintain fear among the population, realizing that a fearful population is easier to control than a fearless one, as Frankfort explained. The common desire for security need not have survived after the Egyptian Empire extended the military frontier of Egypt well into Asia, and thus removed the peril from the immediate frontier. However, it was a restless age, and there were perils on the distant horizon which could be invoked to hold the community together, since unity was to the advantage of certain central powers. A fear psychosis once engendered remained present, and there were forces in Egypt which kept alive this fear psychosis in order to maintain the unified purpose of Egypt. The artificial construction and maintenance of fear in a population by a ruling class has remained pervasive from the time of ancient Egypt up until the modern day. Oppressive governments often maintain their grip on a nation by continually invoking fear, and then proceeding to claim that only they, the ruling powers, have the means and ability to protect the population from such a threat. The whole aim of practical politics, wrote H.L. Mencken, is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary, John Adams, one of the founding fathers of America, echoed this sentiment, writing, "Fear is the foundation of most governments." While there are numerous tactics and strategies that have developed over the centuries to effectively exploit the public through fear, two of the more powerful and efficient are the use of false flags and the implementation of propaganda via repetition. A false flag can be defined as a covert operation, designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they are being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who actually planned and executed them. In his book Feardom, Connor Boyack provides a nice explanation on the effectiveness of false flag attacks for those looking to institute social control. Physical attacks lead to a corresponding increase of trust in political leaders and submission to them. This effect is likely the same whether the attack be a surprise, known to political leaders yet allowed to happen, or directly orchestrated by these same leaders who stand to benefit from the increased trust and submission. False flag operations are used because people generally do not have access to the details, so they are prone to rely upon what they're told and thus are easily deceived. People will, for the most part, believe what they are told in times of crisis, and so government officials, whether their motives are good or evil, capitalize on or completely fabricate the crises. Repetition is also a well-known and prevalent propaganda technique used to solidify falsehoods and perpetuate fear in the public consciousness. By repeating specific phrases and warnings, and displaying particular symbols and images over and over through various mediums, those in power are able to paralyze entire populations with a fear psychosis. The Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels was well aware of the power of repetition in cloaking falsehoods in a garb of truth, stating, "It would not be impossible to prove with sufficient repetition and a psychological understanding of the people concerned that a square is in fact a circle. They are mere words, and words can be molded until they clothe ideas in disguise." George Orwell, in a related manner, viewed political language as largely a form of propaganda designed to deceive people, as he wrote, "Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind." The technological advances of the last century have given those in power the ability to propagate their narratives and engage in fear-mongering to an extent never before seen in history. However, despite the unnerving situation we find ourselves in, there is an antidote to the power of propaganda and fear-mongering, that being knowledge. Plato rightly stated that ignorance is the root of misfortune, and as long as we remain ignorant of the fact that all too often, those who claim to protect us from fear are actually manipulating our fears for their own benefit, then we will be contributing to the misfortune of the world through our ignorant compliance. The philosopher Voltaire stated that those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. To avoid being an individual who can be convinced of absurdities, one must become an active truth seeker, instead of the all too common passive propaganda receiver. An important step in becoming an active truth seeker is the realization that when evaluating the claims of those in power, skepticism is warranted and even necessary. Very often those who rule do not have the best interests of the public at heart, for as Alexander Solzhenitsyn put it, "Political genius lies in extracting success even from the people's ruin." The reality is that most of us are not in a position to single-handedly change the world, but we can at least try to rid ourselves of the unnecessary fears which are the fuel for so much hate and destruction in the world. In fact, taking responsibility for one's actions and the beliefs that motivate such actions may be the most important thing one can do when faced with the prospect of an oppressive government. For as Stanley Milgram noted, the disappearance of a sense of responsibility is the most far-reaching consequence of submission to authority, and furthermore, might there be truth to the comment by F.A. Harper that the man who knows what freedom means will find a way to be free? At this point, some may be thinking that while the use of fear by those in power certainly contributed to horrible situations in the past, most notably in the totalitarian states of Russia, Germany, and China in the 20th century, Western nations of the present are far from approaching a situation so dire. Hopefully this is true, but it is important to realize that those who have lived through the rise of oppressive governments have seldom realized the perilous situation they were in until it was too late. We will conclude this lecture with a fascinating but ominous passage from the book They Thought They Were Free, which is based on interviews with normal Germans who lived during the Nazi regime. The following quote comes from one of the Germans interviewed, where he discusses why he thought that more ordinary Germans didn't take a stand against the rise of the Nazi government. One doesn't see exactly where or how to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join with you in resisting somehow. But the one great shocking occasion when tens or hundreds or thousands will join with you never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and smallest, thousands, yes millions, would have been sufficiently shocked. But of course this isn't the way it happens. In between comes all the hundreds of little steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you not to be shocked by the next. And one day too late your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy, and some minor incident collapses it all at once, and you see that everything has changed. Now you live in a world of hate and fear, and the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed.
Okay, my friends, I thought that clip was very good, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. But again, I was hoping that maybe if I'm not articulating how the use of fear, the use of the education system, academia, the monetary system, the government, all of it is their main ammo against us is fear. And they use fear all the time. And like I said, the definition of fear, and I'm paraphrasing in the Department of Homeland Security manual, is the use of fear to manipulate a people. So does our, ain't ours, does their government use fear to manipulate us every single day? But what is the number one agency? If there's any agency that I would say to you strikes the core of fear in your mind, and there's a lot of alphabet agencies out there, I would happen to bet, and I'm not a gambling man, but I would put the house on it, that the IRS would come first in 90% of the respondents to that question. So what does the IRS say about fear? This is Jack Warren Wade Jr., IRS officer in charge of the IRS Nationwide Revenue Officer Training Program. And think of that, folks. Internal Revenue Service. Who's the internal in the country revenue, your sweat equity service? Whose is it? It's the bankers. Remember the Grace Committee? The Grace Committee says flat out that not one nickel, that's their words, not one nickel of your income tax money goes to the operations of the government. It all goes to the bankers. The IRS is a sub-parent corporation to the parent corporation, Federal Reserve, Inc. Jack Warren J. Wade Jr., IRS official in charge of the IRS Nationwide Revenue Officer, Your Sweat Equity, Officer Training Program, how to take your sweat equity. What did he have to say about the use of fear, my friends? Are you ready for this? The tax code, code, what's that mean? Code means to be altered secretly. Remember from the Latin word coda? Coda, to be altered secretly. We got to crack the code, remember? The tax code represents the genius of legal fiction. The IRS has never really known why people pay the income tax. The IRS encourages voluntary compliance through fear. Fear. The tax code represents the genius of legal fiction. The IRS has never really known why people pay the income tax. The IRS encourages voluntary compliance through fear. Fear is the biggest motivator, my friends, and understand that you're being manipulated every day. And ask Key Bono, who is benefiting from the use of this fear. My friends, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, to obtain knowledge, to manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. And we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.